and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is one that I always enjoy doing, and it is a seasonal recommendations, this time for autumn, for fall. I am so in the mood for this season. I am so ready for all the cozy and atmospheric reads. So here I am to give you some recommendations of books that I have already read. Most of them, if not all, most of them, yeah, I have loved, and I am so excited to tell you all about them. I decided to organize them once again by genre, kind of the same way that I did with my summer recommendations. One small thing before I start, I have done a similar video to this once before, so I will link it somewhere on the screen and also in the description box down below for you if you want to see even more recommendations. But let's get into it. I will start with some graphic novels because sometimes it's just what we're in the mood for. A quick read and a pretty read. And the first one that I have here is Mooncakes by Wendy Chu and Suzanne Walker. We have a witch, we have a werewolf, and they go on an adventure together. This is very wholesome, and it's just one of those cute stories, I think, that most people will enjoy. It's not overly complicated to get into. You have a slow burn romance. I really enjoyed this one. On a slightly sillier note, perhaps, we have Fangs by Sarah Anderson. I just adored this because it is really silly. We have this vampire and she gets into a relationship with a werewolf once again, but they are supposed to be mortal enemies, but it just works. And here you have little vignettes, kind of. You get little glimpses into their relationship and little moments, but it's very funny and very cute, and the illustration style is just so pretty. Up next, and the last graphic novel that I have to recommend, we have The Magic Fish. This is one of my favorite graphic novels ever. It's stunning. The illustration style is stunning, and it's one of those, to me, that feels very cozy reading material. One of those that you want to cozy up with a blanket and a cup of tea and just dedicate an afternoon to it. So we have our main character Tian. He is in, I suppose, middle grade age, but he is struggling with communicating with his parents, who are Vietnamese, because he is growing up in America. And the way that they find to communicate and to reach one another is through fairy tales, and fairy tales that Tian is growing up with, that his parents grew up with as well. It's an incredibly heartwarming story. I cried reading this. Then we get into the fantasy, which I love, starting with one of my favorite books ever, one of my favorite authors ever. We have Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare. When I did this video previously, I mentioned Clockwork Angel. I stand by that recommendation. The Infernal Devices is top tier, one of the best series ever, trilogies ever written. But this is the follow-up to that series, and it's also brilliant, amazing, stunning, all the good things. Here we follow the children of those characters. I would absolutely recommend reading that first, but if you've read that or you don't care about it, which is a mistake on your part, I highly encourage picking Chain of Gold up. This takes place in Edwardian England and London. We see the shadow hunters in all of their glory fighting, but also this is very much, this feels like a classic in the sense that you see the characters and their relationships being the forefront of the story. Because this is fantasy, obviously you have world building, you have action, you have a plot that is interesting, but it's the characters. The characters are so interesting to follow, to see their intricacies. Then we have another one of my favorites. We have The Beautiful by Renee Ahdieh, another one that is the first in a series. I loved this book so much, so much. This is kind of about vampires, but almost to the point where you never see them. They're not really mentioned. It's just this presence, this ominous presence that you know about, but you don't really interact with. And this just makes this book so mysterious, so intriguing. This takes place in New Orleans, by the way, in 1872. So you really feel that setting, you really feel immersed in the place. You feel like you're there. The descriptions are absolutely stunning. We have our main character, Celine, and she is running away from France because something happened in her past and she is almost running for her life. At the same time, you have some very interesting people that she meets when she gets to New Orleans. Some people that are also looking for a better life and that become her friends. Some people who have always lived in New Orleans and are very well established, but their paths kind of cross. This has romance, this has mystery. It's the perfect book for this time of year. Then we have Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson. I reread this actually last week, so this is very fresh in my mind. This is also an incredible fantasy, but this one is standalone. And this has the added bonus of being slightly reminiscent of Howl's Moving Castle, a little bit, because you have this character who is he has some troubled past experiences, and he is Nathaniel Thorne, and he is a sorcerer. I think that's what they call them in this book. He does magic. He also has somebody who serves him. You will get it when you read this. Silas, who I adore, and our main character, Elizabeth, who was raised in this library of magical books, because in this world there are grimoires, which are books that hold magical knowledge, you could say, and that have magic within them. And because they have magic written in them, the books themselves are magical. And so we have these special libraries where they are kept, and the apprentices look after them and make sure that they don't do anything bad, because these books kind of have a personality. And Elizabeth is an orphan, and so she grew up in this library training to be an apprentice. And obviously their paths cross because something bad happens. It's not super slow paced, but it is it takes its time to really establish the characters and their relationships. The fact that this is a standalone, it's also really rewarding, because you get to the end and you feel like, oh my god, what a great adventure I just went on. Another favorite of all time, Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. I am so excited for the second book to come out. It's supposed to come out, I think, November or something. I've pre-ordered it. I am so excited because this book was a revelation and I need everyone to read it. We have our main character, Bree, and she is in this special program where, even though she is 16 and high school age, she is taking classes at university. And while there, she discovers the secret society, and things go on from there. This is inspired by the legend of Arthur, of King Arthur, and everything that comes with that, with Merlin and the Round Table, which is something that I had never read before. I know of the story, but not that well, and I loved reading that in this, see the references, and see especially how the author plotted everything. You get to the end of this book and you see so many puzzle pieces aligning and fitting together. The experience of reading this book is so rewarding. You will start this and you will not be able to put it down. It's that compelling. Also, our main character, Bree, is dealing with some very difficult situation because her mother passed away. She died in an accident, and Bree is having a very hard time dealing with that loss and with the grief of that. So we also analyze that very heavily in this book, but so beautifully. I just need everybody to pick this up and to read it so we can talk and gush about it. Then we have one that I have recommended before, But I don't care because this is, I don't know if it's my favorite book of all time, but it's definitely one of my favorite books of all time ever in my life. And it is The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I am going to reread this book before the year ends because I read it a couple years ago for the first time. I loved it and I need it again in my life. It's so magical. I have never read such a beautifully written book before. And it's not that it's overly anything, it's not overly lyrical, it's not overly magical, it's just the exact perfect amount that this story needs. And it's so beautiful, it's magical and it's philosophical, and it makes you think because you have a story within a story, and it's all about stories and the power of them. You take your time reading this book, but you also don't ever want to put it down. It was the most magical experience. I loved it so much. So to give a little glimpse, I've already mentioned that we have stories within stories about stories. So that is very much what happens. And you need to give this book a little bit to capture your attention, to really draw you in, because in the beginning, it will be confusing and you will be getting glimpses of little things that you don't really understand how they fit. But things will get explained in time. It's such a magical experience seeing, once again, all of the pieces coming together. But we do have main characters, and our main character is Zachary. And he stumbles upon this book. He is at university once again, and he stumbles upon this book that has a ton of different stories. But one of those stories is about him. It's about his childhood. It's about a memory that he had for a very long time that he kind of forgot about. But reading this book, it brings it back. And this just starts the whole commotion of this book, of him figuring out who wrote this, how could this actually be a thing. I cannot gush about this more if I wanted to. A more recent read, we have The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This is also one of those that is always recommended, but I feel like this is the time to read it because it takes place during the fall, during the autumn months, and so it's really vibey for this time of year. We have our main character, Kvothe, and at the beginning of the story, in the present timeline, we see him kind of in hiding, and we don't really understand what he is and why he is hiding. We do know that legends are told about him, and what we see in this book is that a chronicler meets Kvothe, and they strike up a deal that Kvothe will tell his life story, and this process will take 3 days. So the premise of this is that each book in this series will be 1 day of him telling his life story, and in this book we see his childhood and his adolescence. This is just a magical tale, and how certain events really affected his life, really changed the course of his life. The last fantasy-ish book that I have today is none other than Vicious by V.E. Schwab, and this feels very appropriate because it also has that academic setting, but this feels more of an anti-hero story and people with powers. So in this story, in this book, we have our two main characters, Eli and Victor, and they met at university once again. Both of them were studying, and in this universe we have EOs, also known as extraordinaries, who are people that have superpowers, essentially, and they come to get these superpowers through traumatic life or death situations. And these two characters, Eli and Victor, between the two of them, there is a big rivalry. There's a lot of playing God here. This is very fast-paced because you have kind of a countdown going. If you want something a little more thrilling, if you want something that will make you think, but at the same time has those villain mystery vibes, this is such a good choice. Then we get into kind of more of a thriller-ish stories, because I don't really read thrillers, so I don't really have that many to recommend. But I read Ace of Spades by Farida Abike Iyemide, And oh my god, this book. Oh my god, this book. The thing that describes it is Gossip Girl meets Get Out. And what a perfect description. This is the story of Devon and Chiamaka, and they are the only two black students at this very prestigious white school. Chiamaka is like the top girl in the school, very much a queen bee kind of character, and Devon just goes about his business. He doesn't want anybody to really notice him. He just wants to get to college. But beginning of senior year, everything changes because there is this entity called ACEs that is targeting them. There are text messages going around spreading rumors about them and really bullying them to an extent that police should be involved. And it's the story of them discovering who is behind this ACEs person and them slowly but so like heart palpitatingly getting their lives back. I was so enthralled with reading this book that I didn't want to put it down, while at the same time was infuriated for these characters. This is really disturbing, but also very socially aware. It discusses privilege, it discusses racism, microaggressions and not microaggressions, and also really appreciated the ending. The next one is a bit of an odd one, and it is Lakewood by Megan Giddings. I don't really know how to explain this book without giving it away, but if you enjoy a slow-ish moving, kind of psychological thriller a little bit, this also deals with science experiments going around. So if you can't deal with that, maybe don't read this. People are invited or recruited or something like that to be part of this experience, of this program, but they are never really told what this is about. It's not that this is overly graphic or I don't know. It is disturbing. It's very disturbing, but it's not anything that wouldn't happen in real life, because it did happen in real life. So knowing that makes this even more eerie and disturbing. But if you're looking for that experience, I highly recommend this. Then we get to the pile of books that it's more real life and contemporary setting. So let's start with a new favorite book of all time for me, Portrait of a Thief by Grace D. Lee. I love this book so much, and once again, this feels like the perfect time of year to be reading it. We have 5 college-age students. They are all like in their early 20s, and they are recruited to do a heist, a very special heist, because all of these people are Chinese or Chinese American, and they are recruited to take back Chinese statues that have been appropriated by the West and by West museums. And their mission is to get these back to China where they belong. And through this book, you see them going on a whirlwind of adventures and really get to know these characters, because even though you have this over-the-top plot, you really get a sense for these characters and you really care and stay because of them. This really discusses the role of colonialism, of imperialism in the world and in art especially. The importance of art, this book discusses that so beautifully as well, and how it impacts everything, even though you may think that it's something extra, but it's not. Art is so important, and this book really highlights that. The sun has come out, so let's try and do the rest of this quickly. Then I have The Mismatch by Sarah Jafari. I have read this book quite a while ago, but I loved it so much. This is more of a millennial fiction kind of story, kind of romance. We have our main character who has just graduated from university, but she's very inexperienced in life, especially when it comes to relationships. And so she's looking for somebody who she will feel comfortable with, but she comes from an Iranian family, so exploring relationships and all of that is not as easy because of her background and the way that she was raised and everything. This book takes place in England, so you see the differences and you see the exploration of that, of growing up in a country where everybody is so like free, but growing up with a different set of rules. This is not a fast-paced book, but it is one of those contemplative and a bit of a melancholy read. And the tagline in the back says, "A kiss isn't just a kiss in this cross-generational story about love, family, faith, and finding yourself." Then we have another one that is a thoughtful read, If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. I loved this one as well because it focuses so much on the characters. I feel like a broken record at this point. Here we see through a variety of different POVs, especially female POVs, and we follow different women through their early 20s. I see them all in South Korea and how different their lives are. Some of them have points of contact, some of them don't. Some of them are friends, but all of them lead such different lives, and this is just an exploration of that. It's very slow moving, very contemplative. You understand who these characters are, what they want out of life, and it's just their lives. It's so good. It also explores the different expectations that women have on them. We have An Emotion of Great Delight by Tahar Mafi. This book is very, let me say that again, very sad. Very difficult to read. Even though this is short, a very quick read, you feel so much for this character, for all of these characters, but we see through our main character, Shadi. And it's been several months since the US officially declared war on Iraq. So you see that timeline, I think it's 2003 if I'm not mistaken. We have a Muslim main character and her family living in the US through this time. We also have this very difficult home life and home situation that our main character goes through. Very traumatic. Check the trigger warnings for this. But at the same time, I really recommend, if you can read this, I really recommend it because it's such a beautifully told story. It's so, like, Tahar Mafi is known for the lyrical way that she writes, and absolutely everything she writes is beautiful, and this is no exception. I absolutely adored this book, even though I really felt the story in my soul. But at the same time, if you want something that is more melancholy, that it's a heavier read, I highly recommend this one. We have Queenie by Candice Carty Williams. Once again, one of those millennial fiction kind of books. We have our main character Queenie, and she feels very lost in life. You see that through her work situation, you see that through her relationships. She's very aimless. Feels almost like you want to give her your hand and kind of take her to safety. I felt that. Like, let me guide you to a safer place. But at the same time, she has an incredible support system. Her family really wants her to be okay. So this is just slice of life. It has so much to say. I wouldn't say this is fast-paced, but I wouldn't call it slow-paced either. It's just a perfect pace for this kind of story. You really get to know this character deeply and you really understand where she's coming from. A stunning character study. It says right here, a darkly comic, bitingly subversive take on life, love, race, and family. Then we have The Vegetarian by Hong Kong. I don't really know how to describe this book because this was such an experience. Our main character is this woman who one day wakes up and decides that she no longer wants to eat meat or anything that comes from animals. Anything that is an animal product, she doesn't want it in her life. And what you see in this story are all of these characters that are part of her life, how this decision that she makes affects different people in her life. And so this book, even though she is our main character, you see through different points of view and none of them are hers. It's a very odd little book. This is one that you will not be indifferent to it, but at the same time, I think most people feel this. You won't be able to really articulate your thoughts on this. You will want to talk about it and you will want to analyze it. I remember that I read this while I was at university. I remember doing some projects based on this book. This book really gives you food for thought. Next, we have Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. One of those sad, contemplative, but also very human stories. So this is poetry. We have a story told in moments and in poems of this family going through grief, because we have, I think, a father and 2 children, if I'm not mistaken, and the mother died. So you have all of them going through grief, but this grief is impersonated by this crow that comes into their lives and talks to them and takes up space in their home. It's such an incredible exploration of the topic, and you see how slowly each of these characters deals with the character of the crow and how they make space for it in their life. Loved the writing, I loved the message. This is a very short, very quick read, but will make you think very deeply. And finally, the last book I have to recommend is Mrs. Death by Selena Godden. I love this book cover. This book is so different from everything else I've ever read. We have our main character, Wolf, who is a young, struggling writer who meets Mrs. Death, who is death personified, I think, by this black woman. And they strike up almost a relationship because Mrs. Death has been in Wolf's life before, so he has met her before, but right now that he is an adult, he recognizes her, and so they strike up this relationship where Mrs. Death explains to him and confides in him the struggles of her life. But then this takes a turn and it's more than you think initially. This is very poetic, very odd, and will make you think a lot as well, especially as you try to put the pieces together and to really understand what is going on and what's the point of everything that is happening. This is not hopeful. This is not one of those hopeful stories, I wouldn't say. This is a bit of a grim take. I would recommend this next to these because it is real life, but it has that slight little weirdness to it. I've been talking for quite a while, but I hope you got some new books to check out during the fall months, during the autumn season. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any recommendations of your own for me, let me know in the comments down below, please. I would love to check them out. And that's it for today. I'll see you next time. Bye!